want to believe that I would be the type of person in a fantasy world to go and document different people and look at all the amazing things in the world. But right now, me here in our world, I am very much a homebody. So I feel like I would not be willing to go to what is called Mount Vengeance for any reason. Hello and welcome to UpperPen. My name is Dakota, and today I am speaking with Chiara Bullen about her debut novel, The Inn at the Foot of Mount Vengeance, which is released July 7th. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
The title is very long, so if I do mess it up, I apologize.
It's okay. I mess it up too sometimes. So yeah.
For folks who've not yet heard of the book, can you give a little description?
Yeah, absolutely. So The Inn at the Foot of Mount Vengeance, got it right, is a cozy fantasy novel that is rooted in Scottish folklore, language, and food. It's inspired by my love of Scotland's mountains and my love of Dungeons and Dragons. It follows historian Ainsworth as he seeks his own glory by documenting the glory of others. He wishes to find heroes who've taken on the fearsome Mount Vengeance and the dragon that's said to be atop it. And he wants to record their adventures so that their legends are like preserved for generations and they will inspire songs and other heroes to follow their footsteps. But when Ainsworth gets to the inn at the foot of Mount Vengeance to seek out these adventurers, it becomes apparent that his task is not so straightforward. Faced with a cursed inn and cowardly adventurers, Ainsworth can't seem to find any evidence that anyone's actually taken on the mountain. So, with his career on the line, this is a mystery that he can't allow to remain unsolved. So, yeah, expect lots of light academia, cozy vibes, found family, and a dash of romance.
So, what I seem to be asking a lot of cozy authors is, did you have to restrain yourself from making this into like an adventure, like a larger kind of grittier story, I guess?
Yes and no. Most of all, no, in the sense that when I started writing this book, I was always very focused on Ainsworth and his personal journey. I guess it could have been a story about like a historian turns hero, like mastering magic and conquering the mountain, kind of in that typical fantasy way. But I wanted to write about the momentous personal journey and like finding your people as you go through that. As well as, the fact that while you're going through journeys like this, like difficult times, we still experience small joys and small comforts, and those things are really important. But at the same time, I have created this new fantasy kingdom, and when it comes to the wider Saltcourt kingdom, I have always had in my head like some of the larger issues that are at play, like happening in the background while Ainsworth is off on his research project. So I guess like through some of the other characters' backstories, I kind of hoped to offer like a wee glimpse of some of those like larger issues and those grittier issues that are happening throughout that land.
I always feel bad for saying like larger or bigger because like these are real, like these are stories of people, and to me, those are the biggest stories, you know? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think I totally understand, but I love cozy fantasy because I love the idea of like, the everyday lives of people in extraordinary worlds. So in these kind of worlds, of course, there are quests and like world saving things going on, but we're just not focusing on them right now. Yeah.
I do feel like the me that wanted to be in the Shire is the me that is reading right now.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Ainsworth is an interesting character because he's sent to the mountain, well, the foot of the mountain, by someone else. He does not want to go. So, what is his like? Why does he not want to go?
Ainsworth, he is accustomed at this point in his life to the finer things in life. He loves the big city, he loves the prestigious institution that he's at. When he's at his, library and his office, he's like going to fancy dinner parties and giving his lectures and enjoying all the aspects of culture that he is kind of like cultivated around himself. So for this research project, to take him to like quite literally the farthest reach of the kingdom and so far away from people he knows and the kind of events that he would like to go to and the food that he would like to eat, he is not keen. No.
So, so would you say he's the like Londoner going to Scotland? Is this the case?
I mean, potentially. I think in my head I always envisioned him as like in Edinburgh, like someone in Edinburgh going pretty rural, but in the grand scheme of the UK, I guess the Londoner going would be more accurate.
Well, to be fair, I don't know much about the UK's like makeup of geography.
This book is a good place to start. It's not.
So you mentioned in the beginning that it's kind of built off of the folklore and the stories of Scotland, if I'm not mistaken. Um, I didn't know that when I was reading it.
There's just like there's like a few like nods to like some aspects of folklore, mythology, and language all the way throughout. Like I wasn't going to take on like a retelling or anything like that, but when I was like creating the world and the creatures in it and the food, language and song, dancing, all that was kind of in the back of my mind. So yeah.
Why choose Ainsworth as our entry to the story here? What does that help with the writing or the for the reader, I guess, and for you, the writer?
Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like my answer to this question is mostly rooted in the fact that like I'm a discovery writer or what might also be called a pantser. So when I got the idea for the story, it was the title was the very first thing. It's going to be called The Inn at the Foot of Mount Vengeance. It's going to be about this inn and it's going to be someone seeking it. And, having someone who, isn't seeking the respite before taking on like a grand quest or mountain, I thought was a nice change to kind of like turn that on its head. And when I first thought of Ainsworth, actually, when he initially jumped into my head, he was like going to be like a journalist, like this era and world's equivalent of a journalist, looking for stories for his like news pamphlet or whatever. But then I sat down to write the very first line, which is pretty much the same since that very first draft. And I was like, oh, no, this guy's an academic. He's a historian. He's not a journalist at all. So that kind of steered the rest of the story.
It's helpful too because he does have like backstory that kind of fills out the world, which I always think is a very helpful tool for writers and for me as a reader to like understand what's going on.
Yeah.
How did you, so he's a researcher. How do you keep yourself from overpopulating the book with kind of like his research mind?
I love thinking about like this question, like writing about a researcher, but the book is not just about his research.
Yeah.
I think that a few things came together in this book to that end. Ainsworth like this project is so new to him, and the reader is right there at the beginning of this project. And of course, cozy fantasy really lends itself to building things from the ground up and following that process as we go forward. So, when Ainsworth's like building his career, he's building the blocks that will, the writing blocks that will form his book. And he's like physically building himself a space to research. And so when we get snippets of like Ainsworth's work and his thoughts, like it's the early stages of the project. So the introduction, the first draft, and hopefully it makes for those insights to be quite light. And then Ainsworth is like the equivalent uh, of like a humanities and history scholar. So what he's really interested in is essentially world building, which is what a fantasy reader absolutely needs. So I had a lot of fun getting to give some of the world through Ainsworth's thought process, because I would have had to give that information anyway. But, he does bore the in staff sometimes. So I think the other characters kept me in line as much as they did Ainsworth when it came to this aspect.
Did you find yourself having to add or remove parts of like his kind of research when you were editing?
I had to move around like the locations that he would mention because I kept changing the like layout of the kingdom, and then he'd be talking about cities that were in the north and I'd be like, nope, that's not there anymore. And then yeah, as I developed some of like the lore around, the creatures that he mentions, and maybe the history. Yeah, I changed some stuff in later drafts after I'd kind of got that foundational first draft, to kind of like streamline that and make it in line with the world building document that I subsequently created.
So that kind of leads me into my next idea. How much extra outside of the book did you end up having to create?
Yeah, so it's like a completely new fancy world to me. As I say, I just go in for that first draft without doing a huge amount of prep. I find that like like you get like little bursts of inspiration when you just sit and write, and that's what I like thrive and build upon to get that initial draft. So then I'll go back and I'll go through it with an eye for, these things. So like world building aspects. What have I mentioned where? How do I build upon that? How do I make it clearer? What can I add to make it more, interesting or make it work better? And then it will go into the document. And the same happens with like character relationships, what's happening with them at what point in the book. I essentially work like from the document out, as opposed to maybe like all the stuff around it then in. But for this book, I also this was really fun. I cooked the recipes that were in the book, because I am a huge fan of food and fantasy fiction. I honestly feel like sometimes it's my favorite part of the books. I mean, people are out there saving the world, going through really difficult things, and I'm reading it like, okay, but like, what are you having to eat? When are you eating next? What's for breakfast? How did you feel about that? So the fact that I got to contribute to that in this book felt like really full circle and special, and it was really nice to get to cook those to make sure that they were all right.
Are they new recipes or are they things that you kind of concocted?
The recipes at the back of the book are, like kind of traditional recipes. So the bannock recipe, it's like one of those things where in the past, like everyone would have their own variation of a bannock recipe and they might change a little bit depending on like events and stuff. With the broth recipe that's in there, Quiddle's broth, that's like based on a kind of like typical it might be called Scotch broth, which is something that like that's familiar. But when you're cooking for yourself, it's very different to when you're maybe putting that recipe down for other people to cook. So I spent the day with my best friend, who is a phenomenal cook and also a food historian, and we worked through them to make sure they were all good.
A food historian, that's got to be the coolest job.
Right? Yeah.
I didn't realize that there were actual recipes in the back. And now I feel kind of dumb because I didn't keep
No,
swiping. I got to the end of the story and I was like, oh, okay, good.
it's done.
But now I really like trying to make recipes that are in fantasy books. So now I have something to try.
Ooh, what recipes have you made?
So the like there's a book called Cursed Cocktails.
Okay.
And he has those like versions of drinks in there. And then the last one that I made was it was like a blueberry pumpkin pie spiced pie.
Oh,
And
nice.
it was really good. And I was like, this tastes like mulled wine, you know, and it's like
Perfect.
perfect for the winter. But I don't know. I like to make bread and stuff. So
Yeah.
I didn't realize that you ended up doing so much for this book because that seems like a lot to me to include these recipes, to include things like that. I don't know.
It was all stuff I loved doing. So yeah, it was good.
Were they always there, or did you add them when you like gave it to the publisher?
Yeah, my publisher asked me, they were like, "Do you want to put some recipes in the back? Can you put some together?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely." But as I say, there was like, as I say, I love to cook. I love to cook for like my friends and family, but the idea of having like recipes under my name, I was like, "Oh, I need to make sure these are all right." Yeah.
That kind of brings me to Honey. Honey is one of the main characters. How would you describe who Honey is for folks?
Honey is a very grounded character, and she's someone who looks out for people, not necessarily in like an overbearing and obvious way, but she's very like, someone you can rely upon. And and then when she meets Ainsworth, he just kind of seems like the complete opposite of that. And I think what I like about their dynamic is that they are very different, but they're still very compatible. That was really fun to play with as well. I think they play off each other a lot, which I hope kind of reveals aspects of their characters.
And they're the two love interests of the story. So that was fun to kind of see.
Yeah, I really, really loved writing a cozy romance. I am like such a slow burn gal. That is like my favorite way to experience any kind of romance story. So that was what I was going for. Spoilers, I guess, but they're pretty cozy looking on the cover. So people
Yeah.
might be expecting that anyway.
Um, did you ever find yourself wanting to amp the romance up in the book? Because it is very much like a subtle kind of romance.
I think it as I say, like as I was writing the initial draft, like this was just what felt right. Like it was a story with romance. Uh it's not a romance, if that makes sense. I know there's certain like expectations and things like that if a book is a romance, or a romantasy, as we now kind of call it. So yeah, when I was reflecting on the development of their relationship, the sort of level I struck it felt right for this tale.
Yeah, and I feel like it's much more about the story as a whole and
Mhm.
like their relationship is important, but it's It feels like it's developing because the story, not the story developing because the romance.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great way to put it. You put it better than I did.
So we've said cozy a bunch of times. And I had this revelation the other day that I don't know that everybody knows what cozy is. Or it differs for people. So what is cozy fantasy to you?
I think it's so exciting to be part of this like genre as it continues to like it's always been there, but it's really having a moment and evolving right now. Um, so yeah, so obviously everyone's expectations are a little bit different. I think for me, having I think I sort of mentioned earlier, like the everyday lives in extraordinary worlds. But for me, I like to see the pretty extraordinary personal journeys that people go through. I mean, like if we take somewhere like, I don't know, Westeros, right? There's definitely some stable employee who's having the most like intense personal drama and life. But we're not going to hear about it because there's a lot of other stuff going on instead. So, like focusing in on yeah, that kind of like focus on specific characters and instances, and then creating the idea of like um, not quite shelter, but these spaces that are restful and healing and kind of allow us the opportunity to reflect on what's going on in our lives, things like that. And of course, for me, found family is huge. I love found family in any kind of story, but I think it really lends itself to cozy in particular. So yeah.
So I also feel like cozy fantasy is a refuge from my everyday life. It has elements of, there's trouble in the world somewhere, but right here, right now, it's not what's important. And that's helpful these days.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's tough because, of course, like to find comfort and coziness can, of course, be a privilege. And that's something that I'm acutely aware of. But yeah, I guess for me the difficulties that are not only in the world but are faced by all of us in an individual level. I didn't want to keep that wholly out of the book. That was always there in the background for my protagonist, for my other characters, for the world as a whole. But we all like seek like comfort and healing whenever we can, and I guess that was something that I hoped to capture in the like atmosphere of this book.
So Honey is not a human character. Why write her as not human? What is the appeal of like fantasy races for you in books?
Yeah, I love the way that non-human characters they simultaneously like bring a familiarity but also a freshness to fantasy stories as writers you get to have your own take on these characters. I For me in particular as well, I know there are exceptions to this rule, but if I'm like reading a book or watching a show or playing a game and there are non-human characters, I usually know that I am in a world that is completely secondary. Obviously exceptions, but I really enjoy that. That's like one of my favorite kind of fantasy stories. So, um, and then as well, I really like playing with like lifespans of non-human characters. So I say I really like playing with it, but this is probably something that's maybe underneath the central story of about vengeance. So I mentioned early on one of the early chapters, Ainsworth feels he feels pressure being a short-lived being. So someone who has in his case, a slightly longer than average lifespan than like a human in this era. He feels pressure as a short-lived being because many of his colleagues at the Scarrow Library, such as Enoch, they are long-lived and they will typically live well over 100 years. So Ainsworth as a character is so very tied up in the idea of legacy. He's aware that he has less time than some of his colleagues to prove himself, to make his ambitions known, and to achieve the success that he so desperately wants to achieve. So I thought that was interesting because it adds this like other element to humanity when it comes to things like competitiveness in careers, ambition, and like what personal markers of success might look like. And also things like burnout and how that might manifest in this kind of situation. So I really liked having that aspect in the world as well.
Do you ever feel like in stories where there are very long-lived characters, um, that they see everybody as like infantile or like juvenile?
Yeah, that's also something that could be pretty interesting to play with. Yeah, I think maybe in this book, maybe Spin is partial to that a little bit.
So you mentioned that you really like D&D. Um, First, what kind of characters do you like to play, or do you just like everything?
I've probably a bit of everything, but I really, for my longest campaign, which finished last year, I really liked playing a character who kind of subverted like the uh expectations of the magic that she could use. So my campaign was like a homebrew campaign, and I asked my DM if druidic magic could be something that was like hereditary as well as something that like you were maybe given as a blessing or you studied for. And I played this character who she was so at odds with the temperament that you'd maybe usually expect from a druid. She hated nature, she hated animals, she hated, turning into an animal. So mechanically, I got to explore like other elements of the druid character that's a little bit different from, the ones we might see represented. That was a lot of fun. But right now, I am playing a kind of tiefling character that's causing so much chaos, which feels kind of standard. So yeah, a little bit of everything, I think.
Did you ever feel like the things that happen in your campaigns or the sessions, did they ever make their way into the book in any particular way?
Not things that happened, but the D&D party that I was in for that campaign, which I was in for 3 years, they all made it into the book as guests of the inn, which was really fun. And yeah, so I was really happy when I like they were always there in all the drafts. And then when, I got to when I sold the book, when I started editing, I was sort of sheepishly in the document, like, these guests are my party. Is it cool if they stay in? And I was very relieved when they said yes. I think they said yes anyway. Well, they're in the book anyway. So
It's just so funny because D&D is such a creative game, and I feel like it's got to lend itself very well to writers in particular or people who are very creative.
I one of the things I love about D&D is like of course like there are shows and podcasts of people playing these games like actual play um media, but I love the fact that like I'll be in a room with my friends and we will create something that like is just solely for that moment. Like we can't recreate it, but we like it's just for us. It's just there. It just exists in that moment and then it's gone. And I don't think that's like a sad thing. I think that's really, I think that's a really special thing to have. So yeah, I think just like being part of that is like a fantastic, like, you get to spend a day being creative and then you're kind of fueled for the rest of your work.
So is there going to be a sequel or any other books in this world?
So yeah, I am working on my second book. I'm not sure how much I can say about it, but it will. The plan is that it's going to be set in the same world, so it's set in the Salt Court Kingdom, but it's with different characters, different stories. So ideally, a reader could pick up the second book first, and that would be okay. But should this be the case, then there will be lots of as familiar aspects and of the world and the history for readers who've read book one, and maybe hopefully some other nods to book one as well. So that would be pretty fun.
Are you, without talking too much about it, is it staying in the cozy realm or are you doing other things?
Yeah, no, it's another cozy.
In at the Mount, the Inn at the Foot of Mount Vengeance. You said it all started because of that title. Um, where did this title come from?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, okay, so I think a few things kind of came together. I like when I came up with that title, which really just seemed to like jump into my head. Um, Before I started writing it, I was like, is it going to be a kind of vibe like, imagine if there was an inn at the foot of Mount Doom and Sam and Frodo got to kind of like recharge a little bit before. So that kind of imagery was there. But then in Scotland, there's this very like iconic image of the Lagangarov hut in front of this mountain called Buachilly Etive Moor. It's this little white bothy in front of this very, I think it's a terrifying mountain. And it feels like it's something that's, and it should be in a fantasy novel, but in reality, it's like it's just up the road. so so again, the title came first, and then those kind of ideas came after, and then the book. Yeah,
Okay. Do you have any plans for books after or like stories after book two that you're working on?
I would absolutely, I would love to do that. I am currently like I have a two-book contract,
Okay.
but I there's so much room to play in Saltcourt. So yeah, I guess I'll just see what happens.
Perfect. What are your names on Instagram and TikTok?
Oh, so it's just Chiara Bullen, author for both of them.
Okay. Presumably you wrote this book at least a year ago or close to.
Yeah, I wrote the first draft in 2023, towards the end of 2023. So yeah, it's been a long time.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
The Inn at the ugh, the Inn at the Foot of Mount Vengeance is out July 7th. And I really hope you guys go pick it up. I thought it was really fun to read. I like academic-y books though, so like I am kind of weird, I think. If you've enjoyed this interview, please share it and like it. It helps not only me, but Kiara get in front of other people who might not know about the book. So share it and tell your friends about the book. And if you would like, I post interviews almost every week here at UpperPen. So just like or follow the podcast. And I hope everybody has a lovely, lovely day. Bye.